Oreshnik, even the thought of them being deployed into Venezuela would be seen as a major escalation, and the US would probably try to stop that. Well, Russia has a very strong relationship with Venezuela. It's its most significant partner in Latin America, and indeed in 2025 it signed a strategic partnership with it, which was really in two areas. One in counter-terrorist area, and the second area was in military and strategic partnership. It's also the case that in the last 20 years, they've sold them over £4 billion worth of arms. Now, of course, they are not the only supplier of arms to Venezuela, and that also provides a geopolitical interest itself, because some of their significant weapon systems involve the sort of part of the axis, authoritarian axis of the future, or now really, even, which is they have significant Iranian weapons, both in anti-ship missiles. They have significant Chinese weapons in terms of anti-ship missiles. And of course, they have Russian air defense systems and also some of their cruise missile systems, including Caliber, which is ones we've seen raining down on Ukraine. That is interesting in itself, because one of the things that you might postulate if there were to be an American land invasion, and I'm not suggesting for a moment that there will be, then it is likely that America would seek to blind, either by electronic means or kinetic means, the radar systems that would control a lot of those systems, and would use its own offset weapons to take out a number of targets. And for that, we would really be talking about Tomahawk and drones, which brings us back full circle, really, to the strategic hesitancy which Trump displayed in not giving Tomahawks to Ukraine, which he firstly said would be a strategic escalation, but secondly he said we need them ourselves. Now, we think the inventory of Tomahawks is about 4,000, and you could indeed see a number of those being deployed if there were to be something which is larger than the sort of sea control which America seems to be on at the moment, and sort of maritime domination. It's the maritime domain at the moment where everything is going on, nothing further than that. It's also worth saying that a large country will not sacrifice itself for a small country. That's really what Trump, the way Trump has really approached Ukraine. He doesn't see that as eliciting any vital interest for the UK, for the US. And it's really the same for Russia, or would be in Venezuela. Again, a large country will not sacrifice itself for a small country. And it's also the case that we always say that leaders may change, vital interests rarely change, but geography never changes. And it's that geographical bit which I think comes into play in any American response, because they often have quoted historically the Monroe Doctrine from 1823, which was then updated actually in the early 20th century with the Roosevelt corollary that the US would take actions should any, at that time, European power be involved in Latin America. And of course that was updated really in the 62 Cuban Missile Crisis. And I think the rope metaphor of Khrushchev is relevant here when he talked at the time about when he sent a letter to President Kennedy that you and I should not pull on a rope of war, because the tighter that the knot goes, the more difficult it will be to cut it. And if we cut it, it might go in places that we don't want. He was really alluding to the sort of nuclear profile. So do I think that we're going to get anywhere near that? No, I don't. With this strategic forward-leaning rhetoric, which we often see from some of the Russians, we've seen it from Medvedev before, occasionally we see it from Putin himself, but I think it would be absolutely clear that the Americans would not take kindly to Oreshnik being even the thought of them being deployed into Venezuela, because that is an intermediate range ballistic missile, or at least ballistic nuclear capable, and that would be seen as a major escalation. So I think you'll see probably a clarification, a klaxon on that from Russia itself in the next few days. But all these things in the last 2 weeks really have shown, including all the rhetoric we've seen from both sides about nuclear testing again, and probably a bit of misinformation from what Trump's understanding was. All of this, though, is a symptom of bad politics and bad geopolitics, because arms and weapons are a symptom of hostility. They are not a cause of hostility. No, I think the characterization of a proxy war would be wrong. Russia would posit it in the same way that we would posit our involvement and support for Ukraine as keeping the sovereign independence of Venezuela against an aggressor. I don't think that is the same as a proxy war. And that part of it about strategic bombing, I think that's part of the problem for America, that I don't think there is such a thing as strategic bombing in this context. And that's one of the problems we currently have about what is the nature of this mission, because war is far more than just the servicing of targets. So it would be very easy to sanitize the area before you do something against ports or supposed infrastructure of drug targets. But that doesn't mean you solve the problem of drugs, where there are both pull factors of demand in America and globally, and the push factors in Venezuela and Colombia more so, because it's probably the transit routes there, which is the profit factor. So they can easily have tactical effects. I'm not sure they can have strategic effects. And my concern would be that we'll get into a sort of Afghan type situation where you have a mowing the lawn or whack-a-mole, where you're whacking something, but the problem still continues to pop up elsewhere. And I think that's why we have this hesitancy about what the mission is. Is it a counter-narcotics operation? Is it a regime change operation? Because that is different than doing decapitation strikes against regime forces, particularly when the US sees Maduro as the leader of the cartel of the Suns, a sort of network of political and military officials who are involved in drug trafficking. Or is this just a pressure strategy to try and get Maduro to change his ways? That's the problem, that the characterization of those is either a law enforcement problem, it's either a military problem, or is it a development and governance problem? Now, I'm not suggesting that Venezuela is anything like Helmand Province in Afghanistan, because Venezuela technically could be one of the most richest countries in the world, given its proven reserves of oil. And indeed, that area was one of the principal flow rates for the UK in the Second World War before the Middle East came online. Well, I do think it would be akin to that, but there's a big difference between this, as I really indicated, between the strategic rhetoric of saying we'll put Oreshnik missiles there and actually putting them there. And the US would probably try to stop that by either, rather like they were doing in the Cuban Missile Crisis, by some sort of air or sea blockade, and I just don't see them tolerating that. As I said, all this is a symptom of bad politics. And again, coming on to that point about large countries won't sacrifice themselves for a smaller country, it's whether ultimately this is sort of from Putin and Russia's perspective a kind of three or four dimensional chess, where the threat of this is potentially used as leverage over America in Ukraine, because one of the ways you could look at this is, if we solve the Ukraine problem, then we wouldn't have this problem probably with Venezuela or the Russian influence there in a way, and we could do a deal on that. And that would therefore come back to the sort of Witkoff idea of the easiest way to solve the peace in Ukraine is to give the sort of 4+1 to Russia. That is, the Crimea plus the 4 partially occupied but illegally annexed in Russia political terms provinces or oblasts. So I don't think that sort of four-dimensional chess is probably what the Russians have said at the moment. It's just one single member in the Duma. So I wouldn't rush to a conclusion to say that that's a sort of geostrategic thinking on the Russian side at this precise moment.